there's got to be the due diligence. There has got to be the analytics. There has got to be the persuasive explanation in the report.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
And welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out with you once again in the podcast chair. I want to remind you that we are sponsored by a great company called A La Mode. Of course, A La Mode is the software that I use to write up my appraisal reports, as should you, mainly because of all the bells and whistles that you get with A La Mode that you won't see in other places. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or 800 A La Mode. We, of course, are sponsored by Working RE magazine. Working RE is the place that I go to find out more about what's going on in the world of appraisal, and you should be too, with their free newsletter. Check them out. Go to workingre.com. Again, workingre.com. I want to welcome back to the program my good friend and a pretty consistent guest here on the Appraiser Coach Podcast, a guy who has his own podcast, Mr. Tim Andersen. Welcome back, my friend.
Dustin, thank you. It is always good to be with you and your listeners. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you're back from your trips safe and sound. So
yeah, it's good to be back in the comfortable podcast chair. I mentioned your podcast. Tell us a little bit more, and where can people find it?
Dustin, they can go to, it's on Apple. I think it's on Spotify. It's all over the place. Or go to my website and the appraisersadvocate.com and go to podcasts and click on that. And then we keep about the most recent, I think 6 or 8 of them up there.
Got it.
Yeah, they're all on Apple Podcasts.
And I should say they are a much shorter format than the Appraiser Coach podcast, which I think is wise, my friend. I think anybody, and not just appraisers, have we are increasingly having a shorter attention span, and I love that you're short and sweet to the point, my friend.
Well, it's easy for someone of my limited mental capacity.
Whatever.
So we keep them short.
Well, Tim, a lot of times what we do here is a program called Dear USPAP Instructor, where we take questions from the audience, if you will, from the listeners, and try to answer those. Today, I want to go a little different direction because I think there's a lot of talk right now, and rightfully so, about some changes that are happening in the world of appraisal, and want to kind of talk to you a little bit about that. Some are referring to it as the modernization of appraisals. Fannie Mae's made some pretty huge changes. Let's start with that. Let's start with the GSEs. They've done some modernization. We have received word that they're doing some more modernization. The value acceptance program, the fact that they're hiring more property inspectors. And I'm curious, Tim, just because you're kind of tapped into the world of appraisals and appraisers and the changes that are happening, what your take is on all this.
Dustin, okay, let's talk about the property inspectors first.
Yeah.
Traditionally, appraisers have done the inspections of the property, even though there is no ethical requirement, meaning USPAP. Even though there's no ethical requirement, appraisers do so. The GSEs demanded an inspection, and traditionally appraisers filled that role, although there was no particular requirement that the appraiser fill that role. But it was just easier. I mean, the appraisers can do the appraisal, go look at the house. So that has been traditional. But Fannie Mae is basically saying, look, appraisers, it takes too long to get an appraisal from the order until it comes back to us. It takes too long. And that part is true. Although there are many reasons for that, not all of which need to be laid at the foot of the appraiser. For example, AMCs will shop an appraisal. and for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, oh, okay, well, we got somebody who'll take it for what we're willing to pay for it. But even though we wasted 2 weeks looking for it, appraiser, you got to have it to us in 48 hours. So that's part of the problem. We are not the issue there is capable of being spread among many protagonists. We were told there was a shortage of appraisers. Well, even though if you look at the number of appraisers nationwide, it was not decreasing. Most of those appraisers were concentrated in the major metropolitan areas. Therefore, if you lived in West Texas or North or South Dakota or Northern Idaho, there was a shortage of appraisers because, let's face it, normal thinking people are not going to go to those places. No, that's not true, Dustin. I apologize for that. Both my parents were from Idaho. Let's face it, there just isn't that much work in heavily rural areas. So there weren't that many appraisers. So there was an appraiser shortage. But it wasn't because there were too few appraisers. It was just because there were too few appraisers in some places.
And willing to do some types of assignments, I would
and willing to do some types of assignments. If it takes driving 250 miles, even sometimes each way, that's not a job most appraisers are going to jump all over. So there was an appraiser shortage, but simply to say there aren't enough appraisers would be flat untrue.
Sure.
There were plenty of appraisers, just maybe not some in rural areas. So that was the issue there. So Fannie Mae said, "Okay, we've got to take some steps proactively because the appraisers aren't. So what is it we can do?" Well, one of the things they said was, "Okay, we will," and COVID proved this. The number of foreclosures that happened on loans that were granted during the COVID shutdown did not show any greater a ratio of foreclosure than those before. So Fannie Mae says, "Okay, really, do the appraisers have to stick boots in the living room? Really, do they?" And they found out that in many cases, no. Now, obviously, some cases, yes.
Sure.
But in many cases, especially in the cookie cutter houses, no, they didn't. So they said, "Okay, we'll go with the property inspectors." Now, whether that is a plus or a minus is still to be seen.
Sure.
Fannie Mae puts the onus of the quality of the appraiser on the lender. Fannie Mae is not going to train lenders. Fannie Mae is not going to create a cadre, Fannie Mae is not going to train inspectors.
Appraisers.
Inspectors.
Sure. Yeah.
Fannie Mae is not going to offer classes, how to inspect a house. They leave that up to the individual lender. That's on the lender's shoulders. Now, are lenders going to use real estate appraisers to do this? So far, they haven't, even though that's stupid, because appraisers are probably the most qualified to inspect. But if others can jump into that breach and take that responsibility, that leaves the appraiser free to appraise rather than have to inspect or photograph properties. And there are pluses and minuses to that, Dustin. The plus is, well, the appraiser is going to get more work done. The minuses are that is going to reinforce the unfortunate silo mentality that way too many appraisers have. And the GSEs are saying, well, you're not doing as much work, so we're not going to pay as much money. The thing is, the inspection of the property is not where the work comes in. It's the analytics. It's complying with standard 1. That's where the work comes in. So a lot of appraisers are very upset over this issue of appraisal inspectors. Some aren't. But as of yet, we have not seen any reason to see that it is not going to work. It very well may not, but it's probably going to take 12 to 18 months of practical application of the program to find out if it's going to work. The other issue is this value acceptance, where Fannie Mae, in fact, Fannie Mae as well as Freddie Mac and VA is saying, well, under certain circumstances, under certain very low risk loans, no, there's not going to be an appraisal. Now, a lot of appraisers have taken this to mean the appraiser is being taken out of the picture altogether, which simply is not true. Right now, the way value acceptance is set up, fewer than 10% of appraisals would qualify. For example, refinance would not qualify at all. Okay, so any refinance loan is going to have an appraiser put boots in the living room. And then if somebody has $1 million house, they want to borrow $50,000 to go on a round the world cruise. Quite frankly, you don't need an appraisal. That's kind of silly. The bank can say, well, $1 million house, $50,000 cruise. Hello, if there's a default, we're covered. You don't
Sure.
need an appraisal. So the value and the thing is, appraisers say, well, Fannie Mae never contacted us appraisers before they did that. That's right. And Dustin, I don't contact you before I make a financial decision. It's none of your damn business.
I wish you would, Tim.
Oh, okay, well, all right, from now on, I will. And you don't contact me because it's none of my damn business.
Yeah.
So Fannie Mae, it's none of appraisers' business how Fannie Mae chooses to underwrite loans. And I don't know why appraisers are getting their noses all bent out of shape over that. It's not our business. That's not what we do. We broker facts. We provide information. We provide analytics. And then what Fannie Mae does with that, assuming they write us a check properly, is their business. It's not ours.
For sure.
So it's a done deal. Appraisers are going to have to accept it, whether they like it or not. But then maybe, here's an idea. Do something other than GSE work. Oh, how radical.
Yeah.
What a critical thinking.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, we can't do that. So you don't want to do GSE work? Then damn it, don't do GSE work.
Yeah.
Go work for attorneys. Go work for CPAs. Measure houses.
That's so hard, Tim.
I know it is, Dustin. I know it is. And the point is, everything's difficult at the beginning. And then with practice, it gets easier.
Yeah. For sure. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to back up for just a second, Tim, and talk about these property inspectors, because two questions come to mind. And you started to answer the one, and I want to dive into it a little bit further. And that specifically is time. A lot of appraisers are saying, how does splitting the appraisal up between a property inspector and an analyst back at the office actually save time? It seems like it's actually going to add time to the process. What are your thoughts on that? Just your opinion.
Right. It will add time to the process, but that's not where the time savings is. The time savings comes for those jobs where the inspector turns the paperwork into the lender, and the lender says, "Oh, okay, everything's good. Let's go. We don't need the appraisal." That's where the time savings is.
Gotcha. Okay.
But if an appraiser is going to have to go back out, then no, there is no net time savings.
You're saying that the time is saved because the inspector might go out, and then when they get that data back, there's a number of those that they say we don't need to now go through with an appraisal. It's a ratio thing.
Yes, that's where the time savings will be.
Okay.
But no, if the appraiser has to follow up for whatever reason, no, there is no time savings. There is no money savings. And the GSEs know that.
And the second question I think that most appraisers are asking is, well, let's talk about the quality here. You said it earlier that in most cases the appraiser is probably the most qualified individual to walk through that house. I can see both sides of that coin. Certainly, I agree. We're trained, we're educated, we're experienced in that type of thing. Another side of me says, yeah, but it's just data, right? It's just data collection. And the question that comes up, the concern is, and you've heard the term, right? And it's not to disparage Uber drivers, but you've said, what are they going to do? Just take Uber drivers and teach them to walk through a house? What are your thoughts about qualifications? Because I think the biggest concern is not necessarily that the appraiser themselves is not necessarily walking through the house, but the concern is, how can I trust that individual to bring me the data that I need to do my job?
Okay, Dustin, the first time you walked through a house with your dad back in the previous millennium, did you have a clue what you were doing?
Well, let's put it this way. It took me 3 hours to walk through my first house.
Okay. Dustin, you didn't have a clue what you were doing.
No.
The first house I walked through, I came into real estate appraisal primarily from the brokerage industry, but my mother had been an interior decorator, and I had helped her a lot. So as a result, I'm walking through houses and I'm looking at the color of the carpet. No, the couch doesn't match the drapes, and the drapes don't match the bathroom. That's crap. So I had to learn how to inspect a property. So anybody can learn how to inspect a property. Now, appraisers have the advantage because they've had that training.
And they're done that.
But let's face it, anybody can get that training. So to say, well, what are they going to do? Let Uber drivers go through the house? Well, let's hope not. I don't really think that's going to happen. But again, it's going to be up to the lender to choose who goes through the house, who inspects the house, not the appraiser. And then when the appraiser gets that data, the appraiser is going to say, okay, all right, this is good enough. Or, nope, this won't fly. I'm not going to do this appraisal unless I get to go out and inspect it.
Okay.
And the lender is going to say, well, okay, appraiser, thanks. We'll pay you for what you've done and let somebody else do it. Or, okay, appraiser, thanks for your candor and your professionalism. We appreciate that, going out and stick boots in the living room. So, you mentioned before we got on the air change, and change is difficult. Yes, it is. Nobody debates that, but it's also inevitable. And therefore, rather than complain about these changes that have been made, and which, by the way, are mostly none of our business, we need to adapt to them. If we don't adapt to them, then we're going to have to adapt to something else. If we don't adapt to these changes, then we're going to have to adapt to the changes necessary to do, for example, litigation work. And I've done litigation work, and let me tell you, even though it pays really, really well, if you try to go into a court as an expert witness and you have done no more work than you did when you were inspecting the house for a standard GSE appraisal, you'll get one job.
Yeah.
And you'll never get hired again, because for the standard that an attorney has to meet in court, and you're not an advocate, the attorney is, but you are an extension of the attorney. If you don't provide that attorney with the type of service that he or she demands, so that he or she has a chance of going to court and winning, then you're not going to get any more work. It's that simple. And the attorneys, believe it or not, most of the attorneys are friends with each other, even if they're on different cases, because they'll be on the same side someplace.
Right. They talk.
Okay? Or eventually one attorney is going to hire another attorney to do research because the first attorney's too busy. So, they look at this differently than we do. So as a result, the word will get around. Oh yeah, I hired Appraiser X, and Appraiser X just totally mungled it. I mean, it was embarrassingly bad, and so I'm not going to hire Appraiser X anymore. Well, guess what? Attorney B is going to go, oh, okay, thanks for the tip, I appreciate it. And then when you knock on their door, or you send them an email, or you send them a letter, or you see them in a Rotary meeting or whatever, and you say, hi, I'd like to do work for you, they're going to say to themselves, yeah, and people in hell want ice water. So it ain't going to happen.
We're talking with Tim Andersen. He is the appraiser's advocate. Tim, when we get back, I want to talk about the uptick in ROVs, and want to, of course, end on a positive note of get your advice about what appraisers can be doing with the changes that are coming, and to protect themselves. But first, I want to pause and remind you of what you should be doing, and that is keeping up with these changes in the industry, as we've been talking about today. Folks, the very best way to do that is to jump on workingre.com. And of course, when you get there, you can sign up for their free newsletter. It goes out frequently with updates on what's going on in your world. Folks, this is your career. This is your profession. You should know what's going on, and Working RE will help you to do that. Please go to workingre.com and sign up for their newsletter. Again, it's workingre.com. Another thing that you should be doing is making your life as easy as possible by utilizing technology and tools that will help you to be the best at your job. Of course, Alamode leads the pack in that criteria. Check them out by going to alamode.com, or I encourage people to pick up the phone. If you're with any other company, pick up the phone, call Alamode and say, hey, I'm with XYZ company. I'm thinking about changing to Alamode. What benefits am I going to get by moving over to you? And I guarantee, folks, the answer that you receive will be beneficial. Check them out by going to alamode.com, or pick up the phone and call them at 800 Alamode. And and welcome back to the program. We're speaking with my good friend, Mr. Tim Andersen, who is the Appraisers advocate. And then, Tim, we're talking about change today. It's a fun topic for appraisers. They love change.
No, Dustin, they don't. Like, you're still wearing a blue shirt, and I'm still wearing a black T-shirt, and you like your blue shirts, and
I do.
I like my ratty black T-shirt. So, yeah, it's tough to change. Yeah, you
Yeah,
bet.
I love my haircut as well. One of the things that I'm seeing a great uptick on, and maybe it's just me, Tim. I mean, you see this more than I do, but my coaching has indicated there's an increase in ROVs, reconsideration of values. What's going on? Is that true, first of all? And if it is, why?
Dustin, yes, it's true. And it's true for a number of reasons. Number one, let's face it, if you bought a house 2 years ago and you bought it as the result of a bidding frenzy, and you were able to finance it at 2.5%, and now you want to refinance and interest rates are 6%, chances are your house isn't worth what you paid for it. So that's going to upset a lot of people, as if that was the appraiser's fault, which of course it is not.
Right.
But then, Dustin, there's a political motivation behind it, which I'm not going to get into. You mentioned you didn't want to get on your soapbox. I don't want to get on mine. So, but yes, we are seeing these. We are seeing these increasing, and this is a big deal because the real estate appraisal industry, as it sits right now, does not have an organized system by which to appeal an appraisal. Now, you can say, well, go out and get another appraisal. It's, you don't like what Dr. A tells you, go to Dr. B and get another opinion, which is perfectly acceptable. But unfortunately, because we live in such a consumer-oriented age, people still think that if they don't like an appraisal, all they got to do is bitch about it, and somebody's going to come along and change it, and that may not be true. So this is going to happen. Appraisers are going to be called in to account for themselves. Now, when the appraiser has got a big, thick, old, nasty work file, and the appraiser has explained everything clearly in the appraisal report, and the appraiser has done all of the necessary analyses, an ROV is just going to be an inconvenience. When the appraiser has not, when the appraiser has replaced analytics with boilerplate, when the appraiser has replaced persuasive explanation with boilerplate, when the appraiser has not engaged in the proper due diligence, when the appraiser has just thrown 3 comps on a grid, twisted the adjustments to make them make sense, and gotten the thing out in a hurry so they're getting out 3 reports a day, that's going to be a problem. And that appraiser is most likely going to pay some kind of a penalty. Now, right now, about the worst thing that could happen is the appraiser is going to get hauled up before the state. And depending on the state and depending on how many times the appraiser has been up before the state and a few other things, a bad ROV, maybe there's a fine and maybe some classes. Really, it's not a big deal. But, and there's always a but, there are those political forces among us that are looking to make, I don't want to go into length here, but looking to make an ROV just part of the appraisal. And it would become something that chances are the state board would not investigate, but because because a mortgage is made by someone or an entity that operates across state lines, an ROV would become federal. In other words, the Justice Department would look into it. Now, you have to understand that the attorneys for the Justice Department are specifically trained to lose their senses of humor. They watch hours of Three Stooges movies, and every time they want to laugh, they jam a cattle prod into their stomachs.
Oh, okay.
So after a while,
I realize how that worked. I appreciate
after a while, they have no sense of humor. And DOJ attorneys don't get paid to compromise; they get paid to prosecute. And yes, you can insure over stuff like that, but you can't insure over the stress. You can't insure over the lost time. You can't insure over the loss of integrity, even though that may be as much perceived as anything else. So to avoid ROVs is going to be difficult, quite frankly. But the appraiser has got to start today. And by today, I mean now. You've just got to assume that every appraisal you write is eventually going to end up on the desk of a Department of Justice attorney.
Yeah.
And there's got to be the due diligence. There has got to be the analytics. There has got to be the persuasive explanation in the report. In other words, you're not going to say the adjustments are as shown.
Hmm.
That is abysmally stupid. We've got to explain, number one, the market evidence indicating that an adjustment was necessary, and then two, the market evidence indicating the quantity of the adjustment. And both must be present, and both must be chronicled in the work file.
Or that it wasn't, right? I was taught years ago that no adjustment is an adjustment.
No adjustment is an adjustment. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And that has got to be chronicled in the work file. And appraisers are going to say, well, Tim, Dustin, I can't do that for $500. You're right, you can't. I completely agree. So that means you're either going to have to quit doing GSE work or transition to where you do a lot less GSE work, or you're going to have to raise your fees because you're right, you can't do it for $500. But yet that is the standard to which we are going to be held, not only because that is the USPAP standard, but that is the standard of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Fair Housing Act, which are the two big ones. And those two are becoming more prevalent every day. And you and I have spoken about this before. There is a movement afoot. It hasn't received a lot of traction yet, but there is a movement afoot that will make the borrower a de facto intended user. And if that happens, then you can bet you're going to see ROVs go through the roof. And the only way to overcome that, Dustin, is to have an absolutely bulletproof work file. And it might. I see that as impacting appraisers a whole lot more than the issue of property inspectors and the issue of value acceptance.
Well, it's interesting,
it's
Tim.
a lot bigger issue.
You're advocating for a strong work file, and you know what's funny about that is that's not new. You've been saying that for many years.
Dustin, is not new, and it really isn't coming to the fore now. It's been toward the forefront for at least the past 10 years. So, in other words, okay, if you get called up before your state is basically going to say, okay, Dustin, out of your work file, please show us, number one, how you determined that size difference merited an adjustment. And number two, how you concluded that adjustment should be $85 a square foot. And if those analytics are not in the work file, then the state has every right to assume that you didn't do them. You just guessed. Maybe you guessed right, but you still guessed. Yeah. And unfortunately, USPAP does not allow for guesses. USPAP allows for evidence and logic. And if you don't have that evidence in the report, if you cannot demonstrate the logic by which you arrived at that conclusion, then the state has every right to say, well, you guessed. Therefore, you have failed in your responsibility to protect the trust the public should be able to have in appraisers, in what they do and how they do it.
Spoken from the expert himself, the appraiser's advocate, Tim Andersen. Tim, if individuals would like to and should, in my encouragement, to get a hold of you to help them with these types of things, how do they go about doing that?
Tim at theappraisersadvocate.com.
Thank you, my friend. We will catch you next time.
Thank you, Dustin. It's always good to be with you. My best to your family.
Likewise.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
Nonetheless, I want to welcome you back to my program. A lot of times, Tim, what we do here is called Ask, what do we call this, Tim? Ask the USPAP editor. We're gonna have to start that part over. What do we
Oh, no,
call
leave
it
that
then?
in. That was good, Dustin. Leave that in. I think we call it Dear Use Pap
Dear
Instructor.
use PAP instructor. That's right. Okay. Tim, we're talking about change today. It's a fun topic for appraisers. They love change. Yes.
Oh, you want me to respond? Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Editor, go ahead and leave that one in there.
He's like, no, they don't.
Just leave it in there. Don't. We'll try to talk over the silence.